the fourth one. So I'm having a number of conversations with my friends and colleagues because most people are accusing us of, I'm saying us in the psychology field, that we don't want to share information. The field is a sacred field. We are blocking people away. So that is the reason we are having these conversations. And then I think those who have managed to watch the other videos, we are touching on the various fields, categories of psychology. I think we are aware that I'll start with clinical because most people like it a lot. So there's clinical, there's counseling, there's educational, there's research, there's industrial, there are registered counselors. We have psychometrists, and then I've seen we have technicians. I'm not sure if it's still there. And then there's neuropsychology. So I have heard people talking about what's the forensic psychology? We don't have anything like that in South Africa, but I think we can work in that, but we don't. So we are welcoming Janine Senekal. She's a research psychologist and a psychometrist. So
I'm actually only registered as a psychometrist at the moment. I've done the training to be a research psychologist, and I'm actually looking at getting that training official now. So yes. I've been backwards and forwards a bit.
Yeah, so thank you for saying that. So the registered research psychologist and the research psychologist. So being registered is another conversation.
Yes.
But you are a research psychologist.
Yes, my training is in research psychology.
Yes, thank you. So if you can, so I'm going to ask you questions like, how did you become? What do you really do? We heard about the clinical research, educational, industrial, but you have been trained as a research psychologist, but you also, I know that you went for training to become actually a psychometrist.
Yes.
But what do you really do? What do you do?
I have done a lot of different things.
And how long does it take also to become a research psychologist or psychometrist? Yes.
Okay, let me start with research psychology. That you then do your undergraduate, which is at least 3 years, then your honors, which is at least 1 year, and then your master's, which is at least 1 year, and then you do an internship of at least 1 year, and then you write the board exam, and then you're a registered research psychologist. So I did all the way to the end of the internship. I didn't do the board exam. So now I'm having to do another short internship and then do the board exam. So it's a long process. Not all universities do research psychology training. There's then a difference when you do by thesis or if you do with a coursework component. So you must just check those, what the different degrees actually include, because that will determine whether you can then do registered research psychologist or not. So that's your undergrad, honors, masters. So 5 years to do research psychology and then plus internship. For psychometry, you do your undergraduate in psychology and then your honors. And then after that, you do what's called a B-Psych equivalence training program. So sometimes you have to do a couple of different modules to be able to do that program. So Stellenbosch University is the only place in the Western Cape that offers that. There are a couple of other universities that do the B-Psych equivalence for psychometry. I can't remember now off the top of my head, but I think the University of Johannesburg does. But there are only a few that do that. So it's not very common. So sometimes you have to do 1 or 2 modules in the industrial psychology department to be able to do that training program. And that's then a 6-month internship, which you do. So I did that after I'd finished my research internship. I then went and did a psychometry internship because I needed a change of pace, a little different flavor. So that internship I did at the education department, the Western Cape Education Department, and then also at the same time in private practice that does career assessments. So the psychometry training is shorter because it's then only after your honors. Your research psychology training is longer because that includes a master's degree as well. Does that answer that first question enough?
So short, how long? I want to become a psychometrist. I'm liking the word metrist because I think there are measurements involved. How long?
So that's in 5 years. So 3 years undergrad, 1 year honors, at least 6 months for your internship. Sometimes you have to do an extra module, so it'll be 5 years.
So if I have my honors degree in psychology, I can be a psychometrist.
You must then do the internship, the B-Psych equivalence program. And then you become a psychometrist.
Okay, when I'm qualified, what do I do? What do I do with that?
That is a very good question. So psychometry has a smaller, what we call a scope of practice than your psychologists do. Generally, your psychologists can do the most, and then your registered counselors and your psychometrists have what we call a smaller scope, so a limited amount of stuff that you can do. Psychometry is particularly related to your psychological testing, so using psychological measures like your career assessments, IQ assessments, those kind of tests that you would do. But one of the things that isn't in the psychometrist scope of practice is making diagnoses. So if you do an IQ assessment for a learner, you can't make any diagnoses from that assessment. So there's actually not a lot of stuff that you can do independently. You can technically register for independent practice, but you can't, for example, do an assessment to help a student who has ADHD get access to assessment accommodations at school. So like extra time. So an important thing you need to think about is what kind of work you want to do as a psychometrist and whether that is actually then the right career path. If you're wanting to help students access resources that they need to access at schools, you'd be better off becoming an educational psychologist because you can then do the assessment and the diagnosis together. As a psychometrist in independent practice, you'd have to then work underneath a psychologist to be able to do those kind of assessments. So the only thing you can really do in independent practice as a psychometrist is either work in recruiting, so doing recruitment assessments, so like personality tests and kind of things that they'll sometimes do as part of an interview process. But again, you're a little bit limited there. Industrial psychologists normally run that process and psychometrists will then assist in that process. Or you could do career assessments in independent practice. That's your other option. So subject choice assessments for grade 9s or career assessments for grade 11, 12s or people just out of school. So that you can do as an independent psychometrist, but people don't want to pay a lot of money for those and it's not covered by medical aid very often. So there's not a lot that you can actually do as an independent psychometrist. So you need to think quite carefully about that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, excellent then. So you mentioned that you work with psychologists in whatever that you do. So you're like kind of a lab technician for those psychologists.
So that's what a psychotechnician used to be. You mentioned that term at the beginning. A psychotechnician used to be the person who just does the assessments. But HPCSA has changed their categories quite a bit. So now they change to psychometrists, which means you can technically be independent, but because you can't make diagnoses, you actually still end up doing a lot of work with other psychologists because you can't make the diagnosis and then you can't actually answer why the person has come to you for an assessment. You can only tell them, oh, I've got some ideas, but you actually need to go to someone else and then they may have to pay more money. So I don't think that's fair.
Okay, nice, excellent. So I see, my mind is still with the word metrist, measurements, assessments. So for one to become one, do you need to, must you be good in numbers, mathematics or analysis?
And you do have to have some kind of number savviness to be able to keep track of things. There's a lot of detail-oriented work that's involved in testing and assessments. You have to follow very strict protocols in terms of how you do the assessments, how you interpret them and make sense of it. So you do need to be quite detail-oriented. You don't need to be a maths buff. You need to have some idea of how numbers work, but you don't have to do very fancy analysis.
Okay, excellent then. So what kind of skills are required from your own perspective that for one to become, I'll use the word good for now, to be a good psychometrist? What are some of the skills, soft skills, so-called soft skills and hard skills? You mentioned that you need to have not knowledge of numbers, but just to be, what kind of skills are required for one to be an effective psychometrist?
I think one of the things that's really important is having people skills, because oftentimes when people come for assessment, they're a little bit nervous. They feel like they're being tested. So to be able to help people feel comfortable in the process, being able to engage with people is really important. So people skills, a little bit of empathy, being able to converse with people easily to help make people feel comfortable. So those are your more soft skills, your people skills is really important. An important part that goes along with psychometric testing, your actual scales and whatever, is the interview process. And that gives you some really nice understanding of what comes out in the test, and you use those two together. So you need to be able to talk with people and help them open up a little bit, you're not getting them to deal with any problems. You're not doing like what a psychologist does. You're just looking for information. So it's a bit more of an interview than analysis or anything like that. So those soft people skills are really important. The hard skills, you need to have some understanding. Well, you'll get the understanding, but ability to deal with numbers, like we said, very detail oriented. That's quite important. Being able to keep track of things, can't really make mistakes. So you need to have also quite a good writing style, because your reports that you send often go into official files and official documents. So you need to be able to have a good command of writing and being able to write technical reports. Yeah.
Also, there's report writing involved on top of the. Okay, I see now. So I'm grade 12, or I'm doing my psychology degree, or I'm doing my honors. What is your advice to someone who would want to become, I'll say, a psychometrist? I know that I wanted to speak about research psychology because I like it a lot. But what is your advice? What is your advice to someone who wants to become a research psychologist or a psychometrist, or both? What is your advice?
For psychometry, my advice would be, what exactly is it that you're wanting to do? If you're wanting to work with children and to do educational assessments, those kind of things, I'd really recommend that you look at rather doing educational psychology, because then you'll actually be able to do the full assessment process and actually be able to help the children beyond just the assessment. So if you're wanting to go into corporate recruitment, that kind of thing, doing psychometry could be a good option, because it can give you some experience in order to get into your industrial psychology program. So it can be that sort of stepping stone, getting some experience. If you're not sure what you're wanting to do and you want to do it just to get some experience, that's also good. But I'd recommend looking at what it is that you're wanting to do in the future and making sure that you're taking the step towards that goal and not taking too much of a detour, because it is expensive. The psych equivalence program is 15,000 Rand for 6 months at most institutions. So it's quite expensive. 15,000.
15.
Yeah, well, that's when it was a few years ago. I don't know what it is now. And then you're still doing an unpaid 6-month internship. So it's time, it's money. So think about that carefully. If you're wanting, so like if you're thinking of doing educational psychology, maybe rather do the PGCE program. You can still then get work and employment as a teacher while you then do your ed psych training later. So that's then maybe going on a more direct route rather than doing psychometry, which might be a little bit of a sidetrack. But sidetracks aren't bad. I've done lots of sidetracks. They've all added to the tools in my belt, and it's helping a lot. For research psychology, I'd say my advice would be, if you wanting to do research, it gives you really good skills and skills that can be used in a lot of different contexts. There's not going to be jobs for a research psychologist. They're not advertised like that. There's jobs in education and higher education. There's jobs in your market research, things like that. A lot of industry organizations are looking for people with the people skills side of psychology. And so social science research is something that's quite beneficial there if you're interested in that. But some of the training programs don't want the people to go and do market research. They want them to be involved in community research. So yeah, think about what it is that you'd like to do in the future and how you can start getting those skills now. Sometimes you figure it out as you're going, but it's taking the next step towards that goal in the future.
Okay, thank you so much. But what do they teach you in research psychology? Yes, I think that's the final question. I will say that it's important, you can work everywhere else. But what do you learn there? What is the purpose of? I did my honors, and I think now I know everything about psychology. And then what do they teach you that what is that is important?
In research psychology, in the master's program that I did, we had a lot of coursework on research methodology. So your various different approaches to research methods, the philosophy behind research methods, how to do data analysis, how to do data collection. There's so many different approaches that can be used, and you get a really comprehensive and thorough understanding of research methodologies and its application, particularly in the South African context. So you'll have a very comprehensive practical skill set that can be used in a lot of different contexts. So it'll give you really good practical skills, not just theoretical knowledge, which you get in your honors. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much for the information. So just to clarify, I can be a research psychologist when I do the coursework. If I do by thesis, I'm not a research psychologist.
No.
I just have a master's degree in psychology.
Yes.
So if I do my research psychology master's by coursework,
you must then do an internship, and then
um,
you do the board exam, and then you're a registered research
I
psychologist.
become one. Okay,
Yes.
fine. So that's for clarification. And then for psychometry, just for clarification, I
Mhm.
do my internship if I have my honors for 6 months. No, I do it.
Yeah.
Is it 6 months?
6 months, yeah.
And then I do my internship for 6 months as well. And then
No,
I write my
6-month
board exam.
internship and training is in one.
Oh, in
So
one.
after
And
your
then,
honors, you do the 6 months, and then you write the board exam.
okay, and then write board exams, and then I
Mhm.
qualified. Okay, thank you so much. I hope what
Sure.
we've just discussed is going to inspire other people in